Let me open with a truth that might feel uncomfortable to hear. If most of your money is sitting idle in a bank account while you wait for the perfect moment to invest, you're not being cautious. You're locking in a guaranteed loss. And this isn't an opinion. It's basic math that even a high school student could calculate. Yet somehow many intelligent people overlook it again and again. Here's the simple reality most people avoid confronting. If inflation averages around 3% per year, and your savings account earns just 0.5%, you're losing roughly 2.5% of your purchasing power every single year. That isn't a possibility. It's a certainty. Stretch that out over 10 years, and about 25% of what your money can actually buy disappears. Not the number you see on your bank app, but the real-world value of that money. And that's assuming inflation stays at the government's polite, optimistic estimate. Now I already know the objection forming in your mind. But cash feels safe. I can see the balance. It doesn't go down. And that right there is the real problem. You're focusing on the wrong number. You're tracking nominal dollars instead of purchasing power. It's like feeling proud that your car's speedometer still works while completely ignoring the fact that the fuel tank is almost empty. The psychology behind this is predictable. As humans, we're wired with what I call a deprival superreaction tendency. We feel the pain of losing what we already have far more intensely than the pleasure of gaining something new. Because of that, we cling tightly to cash, fearing market swings, while inflation quietly steals from us year after year. We're so afraid of a temporary 20% market drop, one that could recover, that we willingly accept a guaranteed 30% loss over a decade. That's not logical, that's fear, and it's incredibly expensive. Let me share a principle that has saved me from countless financial mistakes over the years. Always invert. Instead of asking, "What should I invest in?" ask, "What actions am I certain will cause me to lose?" When you flip the question this way, the answer becomes painfully clear. Holding cash in an inflationary environment means choosing a certain loss over an uncertain, but highly probable, gain. You're selecting the guaranteed wrong option simply because it feels comfortable. Interestingly, I didn't learn this idea from economics. I learned it by studying physics. In physics, there's a fundamental concept called entropy. Systems naturally drift from order into disorder unless energy is deliberately applied to maintain them. Money works the same way. If you don't actively put your capital to work, inflation slowly but relentlessly erodes its value, whether you notice it or not. Cash has a kind of entropy built into it. Its purchasing power naturally erodes unless you actively intervene. Left alone, it decays. That brings us to the second mental model you need to understand. Compound interest, but working in reverse. Albert Einstein is often credited with calling compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. What he should have added is that it works in both directions. When inflation compounds at roughly 3% per year and your returns are close to zero, you're witnessing reverse compounding quietly eating away at your wealth. It happens slowly enough that you barely notice it year to year. Yet over decades, the damage is enormous. This is where most people get confused. They assume volatility equals risk. But real risk isn't fluctuation. It's permanent loss of purchasing power. A stock portfolio might fall 15% during a bad year. And yes, that can feel uncomfortable. But cash is guaranteed to lose around 3% in a good year, and that loss is permanent. You don't recover it. It's gone for good. Warren Buffett and I didn't build Berkshire Hathaway by sitting on piles of cash. We owned businesses, productive assets that generate earnings, adjust prices, and evolve with inflation. When we purchased See's Candies in 1972 for $25 million, many people believed we had overpaid. What they missed was the real advantage. The business could raise prices. The brand had pricing power. Cash sitting in a bank account has no such ability. It can't adjust. It can't defend itself. It simply sits there, shrinking in real terms, while productive assets grow, adapt, and compound. Now let me walk you through 5 types of assets that are actually safer than cash. Safer in the only way that truly matters, preserving and increasing your real purchasing power. I'll also explain the mental models behind each one, so you can evaluate them independently rather than relying on blind advice. First, productive businesses, what most people casually refer to as stocks. I prefer to think of them as partial ownership in real companies. That distinction matters. Here's the key insight. A well-managed business with pricing power naturally adjusts to inflation. When costs rise, it raises prices. Revenue grows, earnings expand. Take Coca-Cola as an example. When inflation hits, the business doesn't sit there losing value like a dollar bill. It increases prices, maintains margins, and continues to generate cash. As a shareholder, the value of your ownership rises along with it. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting you buy just any stock. Quality matters. Discipline matters. Understanding what you own matters. But the fundamental lesson remains: ownership in strong, productive assets gives you a fighting chance against inflation, while cash, by its very nature, guarantees you fall behind. Most stocks are overpriced most of the time, and most investors end up sabotaging themselves. But owning a stake in exceptional businesses, companies with powerful brands, low capital needs, and real pricing power, is fundamentally different from simply holding cash. The long-term math couldn't be clearer. Over the past century, stocks have delivered average annual returns of roughly 10%, while inflation has averaged around 3%. That leaves a real return of about 7%. Cash, on the other hand, has produced virtually no real return, and, in many periods, a negative one. However, there's a critical caveat you must understand, and it has everything to do with your circle of competence. If you don't understand how businesses operate, if you can't interpret a financial statement, or if you panic and sell during market downturns, then stocks are not safer for you. In that case, you turn them into a dangerous asset through your own behavior. This is where most investment advice fails. People offer one-size-fits-all solutions while ignoring the most important variable of all: the investor's own psychology and knowledge. You need to clearly understand what you know, and just as importantly, recognize what you don't know. The second asset is productive real estate, and that word matters. Not just any property, but real estate that generates income. A rental property that produces steady cash flow is a productive asset. Much like a business, real estate offers several advantages during inflationary periods. Rents tend to rise alongside inflation. If you have a mortgage, the payment typically stays fixed. Over time, you're repaying that loan with cheaper dollars, while the underlying property often increases in value as construction and replacement costs rise. But once again, circle of competence is everything. Being a landlord is not passive. It requires sound judgment, ongoing maintenance, and careful tenant selection. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll buy the wrong property at the wrong price, and then wonder why real estate doesn't work. Warren Buffett and I have owned substantial amounts of real estate through Berkshire Hathaway, but always as productive assets, buildings that businesses operate from, land that serves a clear purpose. Never speculation, always production. That distinction is crucial. Here's a simple test for evaluating any real estate investment. If the property stopped appreciating tomorrow, would you still want to own it based solely on the income it produces? If the answer is no, then you're not investing. You're speculating, and speculation is just another form of gambling. The third asset is yourself. The third asset is you, your skills, your abilities, and your earning power. This is the one asset every person owns, yet it's the most neglected and underinvested of all. Benjamin Franklin understood this deeply when he said, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." That insight matters even more in a conversation about cash. Consider this scenario. If you're early in your career and you have $50,000 sitting idle in a bank account, you may be making a serious mistake. That same money could be used to pay for education, specialized training, or to start a business. Things that could increase your earning power tenfold over time. I've seen people live frugally and take pride in building a large cash reserve, all while their skills slowly become outdated. They focus so much on protecting what they already have that they ignore the far more powerful opportunity to become more valuable. That's backwards thinking. Your earning power represents the present value of everything you will earn in the future. If you can increase that earning power by just 20% through developing better skills, you've created far more long-term value than you likely would by investing that same money into any traditional asset. And unlike stocks or real estate, your skills can't be wiped out by a market crash. However, and this part is critical, investing in yourself only works if you're honest about which skills actually matter. Not all learning is valuable. Picking up a hobby with no real demand doesn't count. You need to focus on skills that create value for others, that are difficult to replace, and that align with genuine market needs. I've spent my life deliberately learning across multiple disciplines: law, mathematics, psychology, physics, business. I studied all of them, not to impress anyone, but because real-world problems are complex, and complex problems require tools from multiple toolkits. You can't build a house with only a hammer. The fourth asset, and this often surprises people, is high-quality bonds, but only in specific situations. Notice the emphasis: high quality, and only under the right conditions. Not just any bonds, and certainly not most bonds in today's environment. Here's the mental model to use. A bond is essentially a promise that you'll be paid money in the future. The real question isn't whether you'll get paid. It's what that money will be worth when it arrives. If you buy a 30-year bond yielding 4% while inflation runs at 3%, you're barely staying ahead, and you've locked up your capital for 3 decades to do it. That said, short-term bonds issued by credit-worthy institutions can still serve a purpose. They're not designed to make you wealthy. Their role is to provide optionality, to keep your resources available so you can act when genuine opportunities appear, while earning something slightly better than holding pure cash. Warren Buffett often talks about holding cash and cash equivalents at Berkshire Hathaway, but notice something important. He never holds very much, usually just enough to cover obligations and to move quickly when opportunity presents itself. In this context, bonds are a temporary parking space, not a final destination. The mistake many people make is treating bonds as safe. In reality, they're often just slightly dressed-up cash. In periods of high inflation, bonds can be just as harmful as holding cash, sometimes even worse, because they lock your money in place. Here's a simple rule to remember. If a bond's yield does not meaningfully exceed expected inflation, you are voluntarily accepting a slow, steady loss of purchasing power. At least with cash, you retain liquidity. Poor quality bonds give you all the disadvantages of cash, with none of the flexibility. The fifth asset is useful hard assets, things that hold value because they serve real human needs, not merely because people collectively agree they should. This is very different from pure speculation in gold or cryptocurrency. I'll come back to speculation in a moment. But first, let me clarify what I mean. I'm talking about assets like productive land, income-generating machinery, or even a dependable vehicle, if that vehicle directly helps you earn money. These are assets that do something. They serve a real function, one that would still matter even if the financial system suffered a complete breakdown. Now let's be very clear about gold. Many people assume gold is the perfect hedge against inflation. But gold just sits there. It doesn't produce anything. It generates no earnings, no cash flow, no output. You buy it hoping someone else will pay you more for it later. That's not investing. That's speculation, just with a very long history. Warren Buffett once joked that you could gather all the gold ever mined, shape it into a massive cube, and it still wouldn't produce a single dollar of value, except the need to hire security guards to protect it. With that same amount of money, you could instead own businesses that generate billions in earnings every single year. Ask yourself honestly, which option sounds smarter? Hard assets only make sense when they're productive. A farm that grows crops makes sense, not farmland you hope to flip. Tools that allow you to build or repair things make sense, not collectibles you pray will rise in value. Function matters more than hope. That brings us to the common thread connecting all 5 assets. They do something. Businesses produce goods and services. Real estate provides shelter. Skills allow you to create value. Even bonds, when chosen carefully, provide optionality and flexibility. These assets are active. They work. Cash, on the other hand, is passive. It simply sits there, slowly decaying in real terms, waiting for you to decide what to do with it. So the question isn't whether cash has a purpose. Of course it does. Cash is useful for short-term needs and for seizing opportunities when they arise. The real question is whether cash deserves to be your primary long-term strategy. Now let's address why intelligent people keep making this mistake. Because understanding the psychology is essential. This isn't about stupidity. Some very smart people are terrible with money. What's happening instead are predictable patterns of human misjudgment. The first is what I call social proof tendency. Everyone around you keeps money in the bank. Your parents did it. Your friends do it. It feels like the responsible, grown-up thing to do. So you follow along without stopping to ask whether it actually makes sense. But popularity doesn't equal correctness. In Weimar Germany, people who did the responsible thing and held their savings in cash were financially wiped out. The socially normal choice turned out to be the economically disastrous one. Social proof is a terrible foundation for financial decisions. The second pattern is availability misweighing tendency. The pain of losing money during a market crash is loud, dramatic, and unforgettable. It dominates the news. People talk about it endlessly. Those stories burn themselves into your memory. Inflation, on the other hand, works quietly. Its damage is subtle and abstract, which makes it easy to ignore. As a result, you end up fearing the wrong threat. You can clearly see a stock portfolio fall 20% in a single year. What you can't easily see is your purchasing power quietly shrinking by 3% every year for 10 years straight. Yet that second loss is far worse. It adds up to roughly 30%, and it's permanent. You never recover it. Still, the first loss feels worse because it's vivid and emotional. That's your brain misleading you. The third psychological trap is what I've mentioned before: deprival superreaction tendency. We hate losing what we already have so intensely that we'll behave irrationally just to avoid that feeling. We'll even accept a guaranteed loss if it helps us avoid the possibility of an uncertain one. The solution isn't pretending these tendencies don't exist. You can't do that. You're human, and you'll always feel them. The real solution is awareness. Learn to recognize these patterns, name them when they show up, and then build systems that protect you from your own psychology. Here's the system I use, and you can adapt it to your own life. I decided long ago what percentage of my assets should be allocated to different categories based on logic and long-term reasoning, not emotion. Once that decision was made, I committed to it. I rebalance when necessary. I don't obsessively check prices. I don't let fear or greed rewrite the plan. This isn't exciting advice. In fact, it's quite boring. But boring and rational consistently beats exciting and emotional over any meaningful period of time. The tortoise beats the hare, not because it's faster, but because it doesn't sprint off in random directions. Now let me offer you a framework for thinking about your own situation, because I can't tell you exactly what to do. I don't know your life, your experience, or your temperament. What I can give you are the right questions to ask. The first question is, what is my circle of competence? What do I genuinely understand? If you understand businesses, you might allocate more toward stocks. If you understand real estate, that may be your focus. If you don't truly understand either, you might be better off using low-cost index funds while investing heavily in developing your skills. The second question is, what is my real risk? Not the volatility you see flashing on a screen, but the risk that you won't have enough purchasing power to live the life you want. For most people, the real danger isn't a temporary market drop. It's inflation steadily destroying their savings. The third question is, what is my time horizon? If you need the money in 6 months, fine. If you need the money in the near future, then yes, keep it in cash. You don't have a choice. But if you won't need that money for the next 10 years, why would you deliberately choose an asset that is virtually guaranteed to lose value over that entire period? That leads to the fourth question. What are the second-order consequences? This is where most people stop thinking too early. They decide that cash feels safe and end the analysis there. But the second-order effect of relying on safe cash is often a weaker retirement, fewer life options, and working far longer than you want to. The fifth question is this: what does inversion tell me? If I hold mostly cash for the next 20 years, what is the most likely outcome? And can I genuinely live with that result? If the answer is no, then the real question becomes, what should I change today? These are not rhetorical questions. Write your answers down. Actually, put them on paper. You'll be surprised how much clarity comes from slowing down and thinking deliberately. Most people never do this. They simply react emotionally and hope things somehow work out. Now here's something uncomfortable, but it needs to be said. The reason most people remain financially stuck isn't a lack of opportunity. It's a lack of rational thinking. They make emotional decisions, follow the crowd, avoid the math, and then wonder why their financial situation never improves. You can't think yourself rich through positive affirmations or motivational slogans. That kind of thinking is useless. But you can think yourself out of poverty by avoiding obvious mistakes, by understanding how compound interest works, and by refusing to voluntarily lose purchasing power. Warren Buffett and I are not wealthy because we're geniuses. We're wealthy because we're rational, patient, and disciplined. We don't panic sell. We don't chase whatever TR